Welcome to Thursday Thoughts, your weekly dose of real, honest conversation on all things personal growth. These are the chats Lucy and I love having every week over on Instagram. They're unfiltered, unedited, and always rooted in practical tools and a dose of inspiration. Let's dive in.
So should we just get straight to it?
Yeah, let's do it.
So we're talking... Yeah.
Go.
So, no, you go. Yeah, so we came up with this about 45 minutes ago. So as ever, God knows what we're going to end up talking about. But we decided to talk about the patriarchy, which was my suggestion because I feel like, and actually I've never thought about talking about it on here before in one of our discussions, but I think it feels like a timely moment in history to be talking about the patriarchy somehow. And I think because we have predominantly female, audiences, both of us. And I think it's a really good time to remind particularly women and men of how much living and growing up in a patriarchal society has impacted the way that we are, the way that we behave, the way that we feel about ourselves and life. And I actually put this into good old ChatGPT, who came up with, I think, is a pretty good sort of description of what it is. So here's what ChatGPT said.
Okay.
So the patriarchy is a social system that historically centers men as the default holders, particularly white men, as the default holders of power, money, status, and authority. And actually, I think that's a pretty good description of it. Because ultimately, when I look back to my own childhood, for example, like I can see now so clearly how it always was men in the driving seat in every area of life, like literally in the driving seat also. Because that's actually one thing that's going off on a slight tangent, but that's actually one way that you still see it to this day. When you see families driving around, it's always the dad who's driving the freaking car, which is always like triggered me because I actually like driving. Anyway, but when I look back, I can see it in my own family. And I think most of us women probably can. And in terms of the way that it's impacted us as women, it's basically conditioned, the patriarchy has essentially conditioned us to be pleasers and to be sort of quiet and accommodating and nice and grateful for crumbs. And the reason I think it's such an important topic to think about is because I think many of us don't ever think about it because these things are so ingrained in our subconscious that we're not even aware of the impact that the patriarchy has had and still continues to have on particularly the lives of women. And I just think that with everything that's going on in the world at the moment, I'm going to say the Epstein files, look at what's going on with that whole web of power and disgustingness. And it's white men. And I'm not saying by any stretch of the imagination that all white men are bad, not all men are bad, but it is always men who are doing these things ultimately. And I think it's really important that, I think the time has come and I think it's happening that women are starting to wise up and women are starting to stop kind of obeying and they're starting to take back control of their lives. This in my topic that I talk about, which is singlehood, there are more single women. More women are going, no, do you know what? I'm not doing this. I'm not stepping into a role that has been laid out for me that doesn't really serve me. And I think a lot of women are realizing that a lot of marriages, not every marriage, obviously, but for a lot of women, marriage does not serve them. It serves the man, but it does not serve the woman. So yeah, and also the other really key, or one of the other really key things about the patriarchy is that it makes women, essentially we're taught that our value and our worth is tied to being chosen by a man. That is one of the main things. And also, it's things like, going back to what I said earlier about how women have been conditioned to be, sort of quiet and pleasing. Things like, if a woman is confident, she's bossy. Whereas for a man, he's a leader. But for a woman, if she's confident, what a bossy cow. What a bossy bitch. How very dare she? Who do you think she is? When a woman stands up for herself. I mean, you only have to look at Donald Trump talking to that journalist. Do you know the woman I'm talking about, Polly?
No.
The other day I can't remember. Do you know what? I can't remember her name and I can't remember the question that she asked. But there was some kind of press conference with Trump, and this female journalist asked Donald Trump. Sounds that's quite fitting actually for Donald Trump. She asked him a question to do with the Epstein files. And he, of course, completely deflected from the question and basically started talking about the fact that in 10 years of knowing you, I've never once seen you smile. And actually, so he twisted the whole thing and made it about this woman not smiling. That is such a brilliant example of the patriarchy in action.
Mm-hmm.
So there's my little rant. I'll let you take over.
Yeah.
Where do we go from here?
I think it is very important to state that this is not men bashing at all, because men are great. I think it's when you talk about the patriarchy, I think it's about talking about it in terms of the social systems that have been in place for many, many years and are now out of date, and were set up by men. And obviously, it has been convenient for men for these social systems to be in place. And yeah, it is an interesting one, because I think as a woman, I remember being so shocked and hadn't really thought about it. You educate, we're very fortunate, very privileged. I kind of got educated, went to university, went and got a job, was doing all the same was on the same trajectory as all of my male peers. And suddenly, for me, yes, I wanted to have children. And I was fortunate enough that I did, because that's what I was wanting at the time. But suddenly, that whole path for me was no more in the same way that it was. It's not the case for everybody, but I think that it's very different. Well, the stats, I think I had a quick look. The stats are that, what was it? 75% of women don't get paid for unpaid, what was it? I can't remember the stat I even looked at.
I should know this because I wrote about this in my book, in the chapter about not having kids.
That was it. Around the globe, 75% of unpaid care work globally is done by women. There was something about mothers earn 5 to 10% less per child once they have a child. And fathers actually earn up to 6% more after becoming dads, because they are seen as more reliable and more stable, whereas women are obviously suddenly very unreliable because they're the ones who are going to look after their child. And yes, biology is a big part of it. Yes, we have to carry babies, and yes, we're the ones who feed babies. And so there is that, and you can't ignore that. But I think for so long, we almost went the other way. You growing up, the only big female figure in power was Margaret Thatcher for us, for our generation. But she had to behave like a man. And I think for so many years, female women who wanted to be in those big jobs had to behave as men. They had to push, and not sort of lean into any of their femininity, because that is the way of being. Men work to a 24-hour cycle. Women don't. We work in a completely different way. We're more on a 28-day cycle. That's how we work, with ebbs and flows. And I think women are beginning to tap into that a lot more, particularly in women's sport. It's great to see women are being trained. I think the England football team, cricket teams have been trained according to a 28-day cycle. Yes, which is really
interesting.
Really interesting.
Yeah.
So, so just the way that even just working life has been set up obviously for men, not for women. But obviously that's gradually beginning to change. But also things like, I mean, the other thing which I when I found out I was outraged about was research, medical research. So for years, and I think it was only really very recently, like in the last 30, 40 years, that any medical research was done on men, because females were deemed to be slightly inconvenient because they're so, hormones are constantly changing, that there were pregnancy risks. So women just weren't researched on. So they were being given the same sort of dosages of drugs as men. So the recommended doses were what the men were. And obviously we're totally different beings. We're totally different systems to men. Thankfully, that's beginning to change. But, look at something like menopause, something which I've done a lot of work on. Again, there's just been virtually no research done on menopause, because obviously it's not relevant to men. Thankfully, again, that is beginning to change, but still trying to get funding for this research is really bloody difficult. So we're still very much in the system.
Oh my God, so much.
I think, thankfully, the veil has been lifted, and more women are beginning to recognise what we have been living under. I think now, if I was to get married today, I would not take the name of my husband. I did take the name of Giles, but at the time, it wasn't. I didn't even think about it. It was like, well, that's what you do. That's what you do.
It's funny because I always felt it always really weirded me out, and I wrote about this in my book. It always weirded me out that women were so willing to give up their surname like that. It always really confused me. I'd be like, isn't that strange that most women I know, and I can't think of one friend of mine who didn't give up her surname, because for me, to give up my surname would have been a huge deal. And it always perplexed me that is what women so willingly did. It's like they couldn't wait to give up their surname. But again, that is because of the conditioning. That is, it's like we're not born with a desire for a diamond wedding ring on our ring finger. That has been conditioned into us, that when we get chosen by a man, he then buys us a diamond ring and blah, 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 blah. And I think what is so interesting is just the fact that we don't even realize the ways that we don't even realize how it's not only how the ways that men are with women, but also the ways that we do it to ourselves, because it's all so internalized. And actually one thing that just came to me when you were talking is one of the ways that I certainly noticed this over the years of my life is the way that it's come out in work, in a work environment. Obviously now I work for myself, thank God, so no one can tell me what to do. But, for decades I worked in the corporate world. I worked at the BBC, I worked in many, many different jobs. And I remember so many times feeling like if I said it, it wouldn't be taken as seriously as if a man said it, whatever it may be. And I think a lot of women can probably relate to that. And I've talked about this particular thing before, and this just shows how incredibly ingrained it is into all of us. So I'll give you an example, right? So, and this isn't a work example, this is a life example. So music has always been my passion, right? I feel like I know a lot about music. I'm one of those people that if you play the first chord of a song, I can name that song. Like it's like my superpower. I always have been. I've always been really good at remembering lyrics, and I've always been passionate about music and considered myself pretty damn knowledgeable. And the number of times, especially when I was at Radio 2, obviously a music radio station, I would be made to feel like my opinion about music was less important than the men around me. But actually that wasn't the example I was going to use. I was going to say that I'm just putting this in context, the example I was going to give, which is when my sister had her kids, she's got 4 kids, it was one of the things that I really have talked to them a lot about music, and I've kind of tried to get them into whoever it may be over the years. And I really noticed them. The boys would deny this, but it is true, is that if I would talk about, say, Fleetwood Mac or Bruce Springsteen or whoever it may be, if I suggested to them that they should go and listen to that, they'd be like, yeah, Auntie Lou, yeah, whatever. But if my brother starts talking about music, they will listen. Or if their dad starts talking about music, they will listen. But when I talked about it, and it isn't always the case, but certainly I used to notice that quite a lot. And again, that is a really good example, I think, of how subtle because that is patriarchy. It is, and the reason it's patriarchy because you as a woman, your opinion about music is not as important or as valid as that of a man's. It's as simple as that. And this is why I think this conversation is so important, because I think a lot of the time we don't realize this. We don't clock it. And that's why it is allowed to continue. That's why the patriarchy is allowed to continue. It's really funny. Do you know Ashley James? She used to be a maid in Chelsea, but she now does things like This Morning. I'm sure you'd recognise her. I don't watch daytime TV, but I've seen reels of hers come up on my Instagram, right? And I don't actually follow her, but she comes up on my Instagram because when she does, I will watch a reel because I think she's really, really interesting and really cool. She's in a relationship, she's got kids, whatever, but she's a real feminist and she talks a lot about women's rights. She knows what she's talking about. I like her a lot. And I've seen a few clips of her on my Instagram on shows like This Morning. And I've seen her in conversation with people like Nick Ferrari. Is it Nick Ferrari from LBC? Is that his name? Do you know the guy I mean?
Yes, I do know.
White guy of a certain age. And I've seen her in conversation with Piers Morgan, for example, having, kind of debates. And you can imagine a young, attractive woman having a conversation with somebody like Nick Ferrari or Piers Morgan about some kind of, women's issue. And there was one conversation I remember with her and Piers Morgan where Piers Morgan, she was talking about the patriarchy, and Piers Morgan kind of totally brushed it off and went, oh yeah, when you talk about the patriarchy in quotation, he literally did quotation marks with his hands. And I thought, that right there you go. There it is. Because when men don't even admit that we live in a patriarchal society, in a system, that's a real problem. But seeing somebody like Ashley James talking to somebody like Piers Morgan is a very good example of the patriarchy in action, because you just notice that superiority that certain men, not all, again, it's not all, and like you said, we're not saying that men are bad, but a certain type of white male of a certain age, particularly, they still see themselves as superior. And that's not even their fault. It's because that is how they've been brought up. I mean, when I look back at my family, I look at it, I can see the men in my family and how they felt superior to the women in my family. And that's not to say there was anything wrong with them. And we've all experienced that.
Yeah.
So fascinating.
It is so fascinating. I mean, I'll add to that as well, the emotional load. And this is, again, really for women who, well, I think, again, for all women, but whether you have children or not, actually, but you end up, most women with children or with family of any type are so much more likely to take on the burden of, well, the burden, I call it the burden, but, the laundry, the cleaning, the mental cognitive load of all the WhatsApp groups, the you've got to yeah, exactly. I like that. All of the stuff that you have to remember, sending the cards, doing the birthday presents or whatever it is, just the stuff which takes up a huge amount of just mental load.
Yeah.
And women just still do it. And I know you can bat against it. I have batted, but often it's because the woman is the one who is probably doing less, more part-time type of work to try and fit everything in. So that ends up, but even I think there's loads of stats to say that even when the women are working full-time and their partner is working full-time, they are more likely to pick up all that sort of that load. But I will say, in on the other hand, a little bit of some glimmers of light here from in my world. So Giles, my husband, he works in the financial world, and in his team there's a team of 4, and there's 2 men and there's 2 women. And the women, I mean, he just raves about these women are so bright, so clever, so bloody amazing at their job. They both recently have had babies. They've both kind of had a good amount of time off work. They've both come back. It's all very flexible. They are not, these, and I hear from Giles's point of view, they are good at what they do. And it's so encouraging to see, in particular, they see it as their superpower in there, that, they've got these women, and women are brilliant at talking and all of the sort of connections and that multitasking, which, is again something which I do think women are very, very good at. Well, of course, they kind of have to be. So there are, I think changes afoot, but it's slow, and we've just got to kind of keep awareness going and keep, hopefully, hoping that it's going to keep going in the right direction. Also, as mum of 2 white middle class boys, who had a very privileged, who have a great upbringing. What we're seeing now is quite interesting. So Felix, who is at university, is on track to get a first in engineering from Durham. Is him and all his mates? No one can get a peek into any sort of job or any internship or they've all been applying for everything, because if you're a white male kind of privileged boy, no one wants you anymore.
I will only ever recommend brands that I know, love and use myself. And one of those is Ancient and Brave. Honestly, they've become part of my daily habits. The very first thing I do every morning is pour myself a big glass of water with their True Hydration in it. It feels like such a simple ritual, but it really sets me up for the day. And I know I'm properly rehydrating with their blend of electrolytes and minerals, especially before I exercise, which I always do in the morning. Then later on, when I make my coffee, I stir in their True Collagen powder into the coffee. Now, it blends in straight away, no fuss, there's no taste, and collagen is something we naturally lose as we age, but it's so important for our skin, joints, and overall vitality. Now, I'll be honest, Ancient and Brave may cost a little more than some of the tubs you'll spot on supermarket shelves, but the difference is you're getting the highest quality ingredients, sourced with integrity and tested to a higher standard, and absolutely no nasties added. That's why I trust them and why I think they're worth every penny. And because I want you to be able to try them out for yourself, I've got a special offer for you. As a listener of this podcast, you can get 20% off your very first order. All you need to do is click the link in the show notes and pop in the code POLYW20 at checkout. They've got more than just collagen and hydration too. They've got creatine, they've got blends, supplements. So it's a perfect chance to explore their range and make the most of that 20% off.
Oh, Polly, your sound's gone.
Kind of all.
Your sound. Oh,
Sorry.
love, your sound's just gone.
Can you hear me?
I can now, but your sound is completely cut
Sorry,
out.
because someone was calling me.
Oh, right.
So I think, we have to bear that in mind for the next generation. There's almost like now, employers are kind of going, right, we've got to be really aware of this. And so rather than going on who is right for the job, which is what it should be, you've got to be right for the job, but you've also got to make sure that you are being equal and balanced with who you employ. It's interesting. It's fascinating to see.
But I think that's more about inclusivity than patriarchy. That's about equality in,
yes.
Racial equality, gender, all of those things. I think that's more about that. I don't think that's a patriarchal thing at all. I think that's to do with the fact that there are certain, companies now have to be seen to be inclusive, and that's.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean?
I definitely. I think so. I think so, but maybe it's, all of it is, you've got to be seen to be doing the right thing, and so I think people are aware of it. You don't want to, it's interesting that cohort of people are actually the ones who are now struggling. I mean, I think everyone's going to be struggling, to be honest, to get a job. Well, who knows? In the traditional sense of what people have been looking to get jobs.
Yeah,
because the world is changing so fast.
Yeah, no, I mean, I do know what you mean, but I think young white guys, young privileged white guys are, I mean, I know that at universities, for example, they're now, it's harder to get into a university if you are a white male from a certain background, but that's not about the patriarchy. That's about inclusivity.
Yeah. Okay.
So I think the patriarchy is more, I think that stems from men of, a much older generation rather than the younger generations who are, like your sons who are potentially disadvantaged because they happen to be white males from a privileged background. But I think that is about a different thing. But then, maybe I'm wrong about that. That's just what.
Yeah. No, okay. No, I can see that.
See what I mean?
Yeah. Yes. But hopefully, because of the awareness of inclusivity, I think it's going to have to swing more to, away from the patriarchy, because we're more aware of including all groups, and some people might say maybe we're going too far and it's got to sort of swing back a bit. It's like anything, isn't it? It's like, you can go one way, then it goes the other way, and actually it's finding that middle ground.
Yeah. I see what you mean.
Yeah, I mean, but I think the patriarchy is going to be probably a system which is going to be in around for quite some time.
Yeah.
And something which actually, though, the more you're aware of, the more you can actually start to. Oh, I don't know how you overcome it.
Well, I think women have to stand up for themselves. I think this, going back to what I was saying earlier about how one of the main things the patriarchy has resulted in is women playing small in general. We play small. We feel, because we've been trained to be quiet and sweet and nice and people pleasers. Men haven't been trained to be like that. Women have. And that is what needs to change.
Yeah,
Women need to be aware of what's going on and go, no, I will not be silenced. I mean, I can think of millions of times over my life where I just kept my mouth shut.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't appropriate, because I was a girl. So, I can't say, because the guys, that is what needs to change. Yeah. And that's why it's so important to have these conversations. And I'm really sorry to bring up the Epstein files again, and I won't go on about them, but this is a really good example of why we need to start standing up to it, and why women need to start using their voices and stop being silenced and stop playing small and stop being afraid to That's the thing, we think, oh God, I mean, I've done it very much less so now, but I've done it many times in my life where I felt like I couldn't express myself in the way that I wanted to, because I was being too much, too loud, too this, too that. Well, guess where that comes from? That is from the patriarchy. Because again, women have been taught that we mustn't be too much. We must be sweet and nice. And, if a woman stands up for herself, she's a fucking bitch. Whereas if a man stands up for himself, he has confidence and he is authoritative. That is what needs to change. And I think that is what women need. It is, and men. It's not just women who need to change, but it's not just women, rather, who need to stand up for themselves. It's men who also need to stand up for it and be aware of it and not pander to it. Because what we do is when we keep centering men as being the superior sex or whatever, we keep doing that. We keep sort of reinforcing it, and therefore the patriarchy will not be dismantled. Like, it makes, partly the reason it survives is because it makes women think that there's something wrong with them rather than something wrong with the system, Yeah. It's like, do you know what I mean?
Yes. No, exactly. Yeah, I mean, it's so embedded that
it is.
You just have to be aware of it. In terms, what was I saying? I was saying something, and then it came into my mind.
You'll think of
I
it.
can't remember what it was. Oh my
What was I
God.
saying? What was I ranting on about? I'm sure it'll come to you.
Yeah, I can't remember what I was going to say now, Lucy.
I don't. It always happens to one of us. It always happens to one of us. Well, I'm just trying to think what I was saying before that might remind you of it. But yeah, I mean, I think the point is that it's incredibly important that women in particular are aware of how conditioned we are as a society to sentiment. I mean, it's like, my audience is mainly single women. Well, we've been taught that our worth comes from being chosen by a man. I mean, you only have to look at some cultures. You only have to look at Indian culture and the way that the women are treated. I mean, you only have to look at the cultures where women aren't allowed to show their fucking faces.
I know.
I mean, it's like, really?
It is. But if you just think about all the Disney films, with the prince coming to rescue the princess, it is always, you just have to go and look at sort of any Jane Austen novel, and all the women are just fluffing around,
waiting to be chosen.
So it is such a big part of our culture. And gosh, we're way ahead of, as you say, so many other cultures.
Well, it's frightening when you think about it. It's actually heartbreaking to think about
leaders, for women, don't we, in the world? Because you look around, there are virtually hardly any. We just need more leaders who are women, which is why we've got to stand up for ourselves and but work in a way that works in a feminine way. I think is the message, because I just think if women work like men in a very masculine way, it doesn't necessarily work for women. And I think that I think women women are so successful when they work really in a feminine way. You see all these amazing leaders who've had all these children, and they make it work. I can't think of that woman's name now, who is renowned in the business world, who in the financial world, who went off and just had so many babies, but she was so successful at what she did. She made it work around her. It's possible. So we just need more women like that to just keep believing that they can do it.
Yeah, and also more women just recognising what is at play here, and recognising how it's impacting the way that they behave and how they perhaps hold themselves back without even realising it. This is what's important. And actually, we should be doing it for those women who are far worse off than we are. Women in cultures where women have to cover their entire bodies and their faces, and they're not allowed to sing in public, and they're not allowed to go into a suit, into a mall. We should be doing it for those women, actually. So oh, well, in a moment where we're like, oh, God, no, I can't say that because, fuck that. Say it. Because, and remember who you're doing it for. Again, it's women who are far worse off than we are in cultures, like we are obviously live in a Western culture, and it's bad enough here. But you only have to look at other countries, like I was saying, I mean, places like cultures like in India or Iran or those kinds of places where women barely have a voice. So let's do it for them. We have to be brave. We have to stand up for ourselves and subsequently them as well.
Absolutely. Well said. So, exactly.
Thank you. That was a rather serious Monday motivation, or Tuesday motivation, rather.
Well, yeah. Thank you, Lucy. Well done. You carried that one. I was. I
don't know about that.
I've been half asleep this morning, but yeah. We'll
be back on Monday.
We'll be back on Monday. Well done.
All right, love.
All right. Take care.
Have a good day. Speak to you later.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.